Hopefully you can all see the screen now. Yeah, great. Okay. So welcome everyone, and welcome to 2025. We've made it, and it's been with a bang with the everything that's been going on social media. So it's a pleasure to have you back for the next in our series of UK Pact webinars. We have the pleasure of welcoming Jess Hobbs today. I'll introduce her in a moment. Before I do that, I just want to, for any of you who haven't been here before, this is a series. It's part of our organising. Anna Lopez is also on the call with me. We were co-chairs of UK Pact, which is an organisation that we are co-constructing with our members this year. And in fact, we'll ask you a bit more about that later today. But the point of today is to continue learning about different topics that are important to our members. So we have members who are parents, we have members who are carers, and the topics that we talk about are all in relation to that. And hopefully we can learn a bit and ask questions of each other and try and develop a bit of a dialogue. So before I go any further, I just wanted to we do this every time, but just to kind of highlight, we are constructing a website which is hopefully going to be a hub for some of this activity. We've got a YouTube channel, and that's where prior recordings are held. We've also got a toolkit which is currently on a Google Doc, but will be housed in the website. And I've been in a bit of dialogue with our web developer this morning, and hopefully we're going to see a bit of progress over the next few weeks. They're looking at the back end of the website, so all the stuff that I have no idea how to do it, they're doing that stuff at the moment, so that's good. And the plan for that would be to become the space where we can share ideas, but also capture a lot of the really great resources that we've already generated as part of the project. So the toolkit is one of those things where we're hoping to help networks from across the country establish and grow based on that body of knowledge that exists in lots of different institutions. Okay. So today, I'm really delighted to welcome my friend, Jess Hobbs, who is someone I met couple of years ago now at the International Conference for Policies and Parental Support, which is a conference that one of our previous speakers organises at York St John. It's Ernestine and Z, and she has been an activist and organiser of that kind of research. And that's where I met Jess, who was starting her doctoral journey. She's, I think, in a third year now. Is that right, Jess? Yeah, so yeah, just about, yeah. So it's certainly gone beyond the kind of initial phase, has done the data generation, is now in analysis and findings, which is really exciting. So Jess joins us from Birkbeck College, doing qualitative longitudinal research. And I won't prelude too much of what she's going to say because I'll let her introduce herself, but I've been so impressed with what Jess has produced already. I've seen the journey as it's gone on over the last 2 years, and the way she presents her data is always a pleasure to watch as well. She takes a more innovative approach, which is brilliant. And on a personal note, this is a topic that's very important to me. I'm interested in masculinities and parents at work, so this is particularly interesting to me. And on an even more personal note, I've lived dad's well-being since 2019 when my son was born, trying to carve out moments in the day where I'm not kind of rushing around or changing nappies or waking up in the middle of the night. So yeah, this is definitely a really important topic and one that I think we should all benefit from. So I will stop sharing my screen now, Jess, and if you would like to say hello and start sharing your screen, that would be great.
Okie dokie. So just find the slideshow. Right, is that visible?
It is.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool. So thanks for the introduction, Mark. I'm Jess Hobbs, and I'm a doctoral student at Birkbeck College in London, as you've said. And thank you so much for inviting me to do this webinar for the UK Pact network. And it's great to see so many people joining here today. So I'm looking forward to the discussion as well. And I know you're recording it as well for the YouTube channel. So yeah, Mark and I have known each other for a number of years now, and I'm a huge fan of his research and the work he's been doing with Anna to raise awareness about things that affect working parents. So it's actually really great for me to be getting to the stage with my own research now where I have something of value that I can share. So I really hope you find this interesting. The research I'm doing for my PhD is a qualitative longitudinal study following the wellbeing experiences of a sample of British fathers through their paternity leave journeys. And I think this is an important topic because fathers need to maintain good mental health and well-being to be effective in their caring responsibilities at home. But as we all well know, the perinatal period is known to be a vulnerable time for parents' mental health generally. And recently we've begun to understand more that fathers can also find this difficult and even experience postnatal depression as they adjust to fatherhood or a growing family and try to balance employment with caring for their families. Paternity leave has often been suggested as a way to promote fathers' well-being during this challenging time, but how and why might it help them cope? So those were the questions that prompted my PhD following fathers' own well-being through their paternity leave journeys. I'm well over halfway through now. It's a part-time PhD, so I've got 7 years altogether. So I'm sort of in year 4 at the moment, so well over halfway through. All the data collection is complete, and I've been systematically working through the analysis. And what I'd like to share with you today are some of my preliminary findings. But before I get into that, I should first tell you a bit about my sample and method. So a sample has 21 fathers from various locations around the country. About half of them took statutory paternity leave, which, as you know, in the UK is a maximum of 2 weeks and really low pay. So some of them added annual leave or holiday on full pay to make that just a little bit longer. The other half of the sample took 3 months or longer, either transferred from their partner's maternity leave using SPL or by taking up a more generous paternity leave benefit that some organisations now offer male employees. These fathers represent quite a few different occupations, including knowledge and place-based workers. For some, it was their first child, and others were extending their family. There was one that had twins, and one who was fostering to adopt, and they actually did go on to adopt the child that he took the parental leave for. A few changed jobs. One went back to work earlier than planned, and one didn't go back to work at all. So I was actually really surprised by the diversity of paternity leave journeys, even in this small sample. And because they took so many different routes and had so many varied experiences, I really did think of them going on leave as like going on a journey. And so to follow those journeys, I looked at their experiences at 3 time points along the way. There was the preparation beforehand. So I interviewed them before they started their leave while they were still at work. Then there's the parental leave itself, which was anything from a few days to several months. So I interviewed them again at some point while they were off work. And the third and final interview was around a month after they'd gone back to work, when they were juggling paid work and parenting. And my 2 research questions are, how do fathers experience their own well-being during their paternity leave journeys? And how is their well-being both challenged and promoted during that journey? So to analyse the data, I'm using the framework analysis technique, and that helps me to retain the time context of each data point in the journeys. But before I show you some examples of how their well-being developed during these journeys, I should probably just briefly clarify what I mean by well-being. So the term well-being is widely used in research and practice, but it can mean all sorts of different things to different people. And even in academia, we don't have a consistent definition or even consistency in whether or not it's hyphenated. So for my work, my PhD, I've adopted Huppert's definition, which is that well-being is the combination of feeling good and functioning effectively. So essentially it has both hedonic and eudaimonic components. The first stage of my analysis was to take each father's responses about how they were feeling and functioning before, during, and after their paternity leave, and visually represent the trajectory that those narratives described. So here are a few examples of those trajectories. At first glance, we can see that each father's well-being appeared to follow quite an individual trajectory. They started from different baseline points. Some of the trajectories were quite smooth, others were really volatile or had sharp increases or decreases. So the well-being trajectories all appeared to be quite different. But when I put them all together, two patterns clearly stood out for me. When they were on paternity leave, their well-being improved, and their well-being deteriorated during the transition back to work. So to try to explain what I was seeing in the data, I went back to the literature on stress and well-being, and much of the theoretical foundation is about the balance of demands and resources. So I then did some in-depth analysis looking at the demands and resources these fathers talked about in their interviews and how those demands and resources changed before, during, and after their paternity leave. And today I'd really like to share 3 preliminary observations about that. So to set the scene, let's look at what was going on before their paternity leave. So most of the fathers in my sample started out the journey in a positive state of well-being, so their demands and resources were quite nicely balanced. On the demand side, they described having both work and home responsibilities, and I've noted just a few examples on the slide. So a specific work demand before leave might be something like handing over work for colleagues to pick up during their leave, or a home demand before leave might be buying and fitting the car seat. On the other side, the combination of resources from work and home with their personal resources like energy or self-efficacy was sufficient or more than sufficient to balance the demands they were facing. So my first finding seems a bit obvious. When they were on leave and their well-being improved, the resources more than outweighed the demands. Home demands did actually increase for most of them because they had a newborn child to care for and everything associated with that. But their work demands decreased massively because they were on leave and were often removed altogether. So on the resources side, critical resources like time and social support actually increased while they were on leave. And although physical personal resources like sleep and energy were low, psychological resources like sense of meaning or purpose, mental capacity, these often increased, especially for fathers that took longer leave durations. So this suggests to me that paternity leave can promote fathers' well-being because it temporarily reduces or even eliminates work demands, tipping the balance with resources to the positive for their well-being. But there was also something in there about critical resources like time. So that's what I want to look at next. Coming back to conservation of resources theory, there is this concept of a resource gain spiral, and a key resource is one that can unlock other resources. And what my data seems to suggest is that paternity leave acts like a key resource that gives the father more control over his time, which allows him greater access to resources like social support or energy, which in turn enable him to replenish some of the personal resources that are core to his well-being, like physical fitness and meaning or purpose in life. I think it's actually going to be helpful here to demonstrate this with an example. So one of my participants, let's call him David. David is an accountant, and when their second daughter was born, his wife shortened her maternity leave and David took the remaining 4 months of parental leave to be sole carer for his 2 daughters when she went back to work. I spoke to David before he started that leave while he was still working, and at that point his well-being was extremely low. Primarily, this was driven by exceptional pressure at work, combined with having a newborn and a 3-year-old at home. I spoke to David again towards the end of his 4 months parental leave, and his well-being was so remarkably improved. It was just incredible for me to see the difference. So what happened to make that difference? The quotes on the right side of this slide are all David's words. The 4 months of paternity leave meant he didn't have paid work taking up the majority of that time. So it's not that he had any more time, but he felt more control over how he chose to use that time. And he talked about having more capacity to deal with things, both in terms of time and mental space. He also felt able to spend quality time with both his daughters, which in turn meant he got more back from those relationships. He had more energy. And more energy, combined with having more control of his time, enabled him to exercise more and cook healthier food. And it all sort of culminated in a sense of fulfilling what he felt was his primary purpose in life, which was to care for his children, and an optimistic outlook for the future. And towards the end of that interview with David, at the end of his paternity leave, I asked him how he was feeling generally, and he said, so happy, content, just content in all aspects. If you could pause time, you would, because you don't want anything to change. If I could repeat the last 4 months forever, I would. And this was just remarkable to see, given where he'd started at the beginning of that journey. And that suggests to me that paternity leave is a key resource for promoting fathers' well-being, because not only does it reduce or eliminate work demands at a time when home demands are really high, it also gives fathers control of how to use the time they're not working. And that can initiate one of these gain spirals where they replenish and acquire valuable personal resources. But as we all know all too well, this is a vulnerable time for fathers' well-being. So I also want to try to understand what challenged well-being. And I found the obvious answer again, that well-being was lower when the combined demands outweighed the resources. But I also noticed something a little bit more interesting that seemed to explain the cases where they had sudden sharp drops in well-being. So coming back to conservation of resources theory, there is also the concept of a resource loss spiral. And I saw several examples of this, which all seem to be triggered by some kind of exceptional demand that was outside the father's control. So again, I think it's probably helpful to give an example here. So another one of my participants, let's call this one Steve. Steve is a university lecturer and he took SPL again with his second child. During his journey, Steve's well-being had a series of sharp drops which seemed to be triggered by repeated illnesses in his family. He needed time to nurse his children when they were sick or to recover from sickness himself. So that meant he didn't go into work consistently and fell behind on some jobs at home. He used any time he had to try to catch up on the things that needed doing, which didn't leave him much capacity to think clearly. So he started making little errors like getting dates wrong. The burden of work and home responsibilities, combined with the lack of time and mental capacity, made him feel tired and low on energy, which in turn meant he didn't exercise much or prioritize his own health. And then you can start to see how his self-confidence and belief begin to be threatened, where he's second-guessing himself or feeling a bit of imposter syndrome. So this example shows how resource loss can spiral, triggered by the illness of others, which is completely outside the father's control. And I noticed that similar patterns in other fathers could all be traced back to some kind of exceptional demand that was out of their control. And that exceptional demand could either be home or work related. So another example where I saw this happening was where there was a restructuring exercise in the father's company while he was off work, and he wasn't sure what his job was going to be when he went back. So just to summarize my preliminary findings again, I am seeing that fathers' well-being improves when they're on paternity leave because it temporarily removes or reduces work demands and gives them more control of that time. But new fathers' well-being is especially vulnerable in the transition back to work after the leave, or if they encounter an exceptional demand that is out of their control. So what does all this mean and what might the implications be? So that is very much work in progress and precisely what I'm giving a lot of thought to and at this point in my analysis. So I'm actually really looking forward to the discussion part of this session and would be really keen to hear your thoughts about what the implications of all this might be. My initial thoughts are that there could certainly be policy implications. In the UK, statutory paternity leave is so poorly paid that many fathers can't even afford to take the 2 weeks. My sample is quite a privileged group in that they've all been able to take some kind of paternity leave, and some have even taken quite long leave. So it seems like yet another example of how privilege can create better health and well-being, and those who are already disadvantaged face even greater risks to their health. So if we want to reduce inequality in the health and well-being for new fathers, then we should be looking at reforming the paternity leave policy in the UK to make it accessible and affordable for all new fathers. In terms of future research, I think it would be interesting to compare the well-being of new fathers in the UK with countries that have more generous or established paternal leave policies, and see if it also has a gain spiral effect in those contexts, and maybe even do some quantitative research to measure it. And the last thing I've been thinking about is how to actively support new fathers' well-being in practice. So if a resource gain spiral that promotes well-being can be initiated by paternity leave because it gives new fathers more control of that time, then what can we recommend to give fathers more control of time at that vulnerable point when they go back to work? And could there be any other key resources in addition to paternity leave that might have a similar effect? Those are the questions that I'm ruminating on, and I'm happy to have shared some of the preliminary findings from my PhD today. I hope you found it interesting, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts and discuss possible implications about this research. So looking forward to the discussion now, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jess. That was great. Yeah, it's a really fascinating to kind of see that breakdown of the journey for different fathers, and that kind of the way you explain it really kind of resonates with me as well. So it's really well delivered, and yeah, I think you're going to make a really important contribution as your project progresses.
I hope so. Thank you.
Does anyone have any burning questions they want to immediately ask? Before I have a couple of questions that I can ask while others think. Sarah, straight away. No, please go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, Jess.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
It was really nice to hear the latest updates because, like Mark, I've been following your research really from when you presented it back at Reading all those, well, several years ago now. But anyway, I was thinking a little bit about the sort of implications and the practice, because obviously, my research is looking at the mother side and the mother's well-being, but I think there's a lot of sort of crossover. And one thing that's come out strongly out of our research, and when you mentioned how can fathers navigate that sort of transition back, one thing that's been really key to a lot of women in our study is the phased return. Is that something that any of your participants were able to do? Because that gives you the time to sort of get back into the swing of things slowly. And I wondered if this was anything, because as I said, it's not very common from the mother side, or beyond having to use your annual leave. And I just wondered if this was something that come out at all from the father side.
So I think the majority of them literally jumped straight back in, full time, full working hours like they were before. Started on a Monday, did a full working week. There's one that's standing out in my mind, who consciously started back to work on a Thursday, because then he only had 2 days to do, and then he had the weekend. So that was one of the very few examples in this group of 21 where they did any kind of phasing. Most of them literally just jumped straight back in. So another thing that stands out is some of the dads talked about not so much phasing the hours, but I suppose you could call this phasing the workload, in that although they were working Monday to Friday and full time, they described how colleagues who were also parents and therefore empathetic were doing things like sort of holding stuff back from them, or almost protecting them from a little bit of the work, to give them that chance to kind of get back into their stride again. So that wasn't anything they asked for, but it was something that colleagues that were empathetic offered, and they noticed that people were doing that. And that seemed to be for a kind of a short period of time. And people would give them like a few weeks dispensation, and then they were expected to be back to normal. And so I think it is a really good point about the phasing of the return, because if we're offering advice to dads in terms of preparing for coming back to work, particularly after a long break, I mean, if you're off for 2 weeks, there isn't that much to catch up on. If you're off for 6 months, there's an enormous amount of things to catch up on, and a lot will have changed while you've been off. So I think particularly for those who take long leave, it's really important to discuss with them about how to proactively structure the kind of almost sort of proactively phase the return. So it's a really helpful point, because we can learn from the good practice of mums.
Or the lack of, even. That's what they would have liked. Yeah.
Before I bring in Claire, I would just like to add, in some sense, those who only take 2 weeks or even 1 week, it's even more important to plan for that period of time, because they haven't had that resource gain spiral that you talked about, where they could replenish their well-being. In some ways, they really do need to have some phased or some plan for how they can navigate those early weeks of sleep deprivation. So no, I think that's a really important point that's just been raised. So thanks for that. Claire, please come in. One of our previous speakers.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jess, for the presentation. Also really good to hear an update. As you know, I am also following you. You have a following here. So yeah, I actually have a few questions, but I'll focus on maybe one. I was thinking about you're probably, because of my research, thinking about couples and this in the context of couples. So I was thinking about if there was anything around like the well-being of the family as a whole, so the partner or mother's well-being and how that interacted with the father's well-being. If there are any findings around that.
So it's not something that I've delved into. There's definitely some things there in the data, and maybe I will sort of get into that at another point when I'm kind of delving more into the wider piece of it. But what I would observe very clearly stands out is the sort of care and concern that the dads actively express about their partner and about their children, and particularly the wife's health, and I say wife generally, that weren't all married in the sample, but the child's mother, her health, her recovery from labour, and awareness of the risk of postnatal depression. A lot of the dads were really acutely aware of all that, and there were a couple in the sample who it was second or even third child, and with the first child their wife had struggled, and so having a second child they were actually quite concerned about not just everything about welcoming a new baby to an existing family, but also they'd had an experience before where the wife really struggled, and they had to step up and provide a lot of support, and they were preparing themselves to do that again. So there was just a lot of care and concern being expressed by the dads about the other members of their family, and that obviously, if you think about my sort of demands and resources, that sits as a demand, a home demand, if you like. So in order to balance that, they're going to need some resources, whether that comes from within or whether that comes from support around them. But yeah, that's definitely a demand that I was seeing on the dads.
Thank you.
I might chip in with a question at this point, Jess. I'm thinking about, I'm doing some research with Rachel Thompson, who's on the call at the moment. We're interested in sort of these journeys, these transitions with dads as well. One of the things that struck me from your really positive example was that father had started off in pre-paternity leave in quite a bad place.
Yeah,
really. And being on paternity leave had a really positive effect. I wondered if it was, it's probably in two parts, but there's something about the soul caregiving as something that actually was a bit transformative for this individual, from what I can tell. And I wonder if for organisations, if they're gaining something from dads having that experience and returning to work replenished in some sense. And if that could be an argument for organisations being more generous with paternity leave or additional leave for partners, in that they are not just, it's not just a one-way policy, that they're actually gaining something back when the people return and they have been replenished by that experience. I don't know if you have any views on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that particular example, I like to include it because it's just, for me, it was really sort of emblematic and really quite striking, how different that was. I think that that may not be the case for all fathers, because not all, so he took 4 months, but not all fathers aspire to be sole carer for that length of time. So when I was asking him about his sense of purpose or direction in life, he felt that his sense of purpose was to be that dad. His sense of purpose was to care for those children. And actually, when he was his well-being was so low before he started his leave, because there were these two little girls at home, and he was having to work so hard that he wasn't feeling he was able to fulfill his purpose. And so that was really sort of, draining his well-being before he started that leave. So then being given that time to sort of reset and actually feel that he was fulfilling that purpose because he had that time with his daughters, it really did have a significant effect. But I think that's because his purpose was related to the care of the children. So that was what he was using his time for. So that may not be what every father wants to do, and some fathers, their purpose is more connected with their work, particularly people that are entrepreneurs or in small businesses and things like that. They have a lot of their purposes related to their work as well as their family. So in that sense, it can be a little bit of a conflict there. So I'm sort of waffling a bit, but I think it's about it's very individual is what I'm trying to say. So rather than sort of encouraging employers that this is one size fits all, give all your dads a really generous paternity leave and encourage them to take it, because then you'll get better well-being and better performance of your staff. That's not going to work for all dads, because some of the dads are actually really keen to get back into work, and so being like having to be away for longer could actually then be detrimental to their well-being, because they would feel they're not fulfilling their purpose because they're being prevented from working. So it's sort of but I think the point is flexibility. So to each father is going to have his own desires and how he wants to use that time. The point is to give control of the time. It's the opportunity, it's up to the dad whether he takes the longer leave if it's offered or not, but it's about giving the choice. And this comes back to this point about control of time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes, Andrea, please.
Hi, thank you very much. Great presentation and very insightful. I wonder, building on your point around flexibility, if other forms of flexibility rather than just paternity leave would also help, like working from home for people that maybe are not doing that, and related to this, whether there is maybe more, say, a stigma around maybe dads that leave work because there is an emergency at the nursery, compared to a mom doing that. I wonder if I don't know, maybe a cultural change within the organization could help. What's your view?
So on the point about flexibility and being able to work different places, different times, absolutely, that's absolutely critical. For most of the dads, they were privileged that they had that sort of autonomy, that they could make those choices. Interestingly, there was one of the dads in my sample, I said some of them were place-based workers who tend to have less flexibility. So one of them was a worker in a steel factory, and before his baby arrived, he was doing shift work, so he was on the night shift. So I'm thinking, you know, how does flexibility, and it does not kind of have the opportunity to work from home, this guy. So interestingly, what happened when he returned, I did the interview when he returned from paternity leave, and it was quite an interesting one because in order to give himself flexibility in his context, he changed job, and he actually quit his job and got a job at a different steel factory where he could work on the day shift. Because he asked his employer, can I go on days consistently? They said no, so he quit and got another job. So it's a bit of a kind of extreme one, but he felt, so he kind of made his own flexibility within his own context, if you see what I mean. So you can see how important flexibility is if they're willing to go to that sort of length to achieve it. Your second point was about stigma, and I think it's quite interesting that I didn't observe any examples in any of these 21 fathers' journeys where they described any form of penalties, backlash, stigma, negative attitudes. All of them were only positive and only had positive things to say about their paternity leave, no matter how long it was they had taken. And they felt really supported by colleagues, workplace, and all that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's just these particular 21 dads, or whether we are seeing a cultural shift in the UK. I don't know what that is, but all I can say is that in my sample of 21, there were no examples of people getting negative reactions to them taking paternity leave.
Thank you very much.
We have time for probably one more question. So Claire,
I think
please go ahead.
Sam
sorry.
has had their hand up
Yes,
physically.
sorry, I didn't see that one.
For a while.
Yes.
So I was just,
Oh,
I don't
please,
actually have a
yes.
question. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, thanks, Claire. Yes, Sam.
Sorry, yeah. So I didn't know if I had to do the hand
No,
thing.
don't worry. Sorry, I hadn't seen that. Apologies.
So I'm coming from this, not from an academic point of view. I'm just from a parent and going to be another one on the way very soon as well. A couple of things. Thanks very much, Jess, for sharing the information. It's really quite interesting to hear and quite comforting as well to an extent. So a couple of things to raise, really. I wonder if in the sample group there was anyone that was self-employed. So myself, I'm self-employed, and then we don't get statutory paternity leave. So we have to sort of judge for ourselves how long we want to take, how long we can afford to take, how long our business can cope without us being there. I'm just in a partnership, so it's not like I can give a lot. There's not a big workforce. It's just two of us working there, and the impact that might have on things. And also, as a secondary thing, really, was there? Have you kind of examined the differences in well-being dependent on what type of careers people maybe have? So, just to explain a bit more, so I'm a self-employed composer, so I'm very much working the creative side of things, and a number of people that have also creatives have experienced quite a lot of stress related to the inability to be as creative as they could be in a job. So it's not the type of job where we can go and just go ahead and go through the motions as easily. We have to be in that moment. And I kind of did think when I had kids, I'd be inspired to create all sorts of amazing things and stuff. But actually, unfortunately, it's the reverse. And a lot of fathers that have been in this have said the same to me, that their creativity has been affected. So I'm just interested in how the types of jobs impacts well-being. I guess that's potentially another PhD even, but I don't know if that's your research.
So to answer the first question, self-employed, yes, there were 2 dads out of the 21 that were self-employed, which, as you mentioned, was quite interesting because they weren't given statutory paternity leave. An employer didn't give them paternity leave. They defined their own paternity leave based on how much time they could afford not to do a work that would generate an income. So it was sort of self-defined. So I've got 2 dads in the sample that were both self-employed. And in terms of the types of career, again, I think it's not so much about different general types of career or occupations. I do think it's about individual circumstances, and the well-being in terms of how it's affected by work. I think a lot of it comes down to levels of autonomy and control over that work. So where someone is at work and they have a lot of pressure and they don't feel that they have the ability to perform to the levels that they feel happy with, or to balance work and home as well as they would like. Those were the examples in my study where well-being was lower. The well-being was better for dads in the study that had some degree of control over their work and could say, I'm going to do this because it needs to be done. I'm not going to do that at the moment because it's lower priority and that can wait. And if they had that autonomy, then their well-being was better. So I don't think it's as clear cut as type of work. I think it's to do with level of control of their work.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because just going back to the point someone made earlier about the transition period as well. Being self-employed, I'm a lot more flexible in my transition period back. Do you know what I mean? And that really impacts how much I can take on. In some ways, it's not so good because I can never really switch off. You know what I mean? It's hard to just go, right, this doesn't need to be looked at, because I work from home as well. So it's kind of everything's all in one. But I think, yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk about with, when you're self-employed, you're unable to come back at your own pace.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think that can really help with the well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great. Really interesting to hear about that side of it. Yeah, really, it's something that I've encountered a bit as well. So it's maybe more to discuss on that type of work and that self-employed. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to say thank you very much for all the questions today. If you do have further questions, I'm sure Jess would be very happy to answer further questions. I just want to briefly, I'll just very briefly share the screen one more time. And so our next session, I'm in negotiations with Dr. Vicky Park, who has some lived experience of being a carer, and we're going to do a talk about that, end-of-life care in particular. So it's a very different topic. Obviously, we are serving parents and carers, so we want to try and keep that balance of topics as we go forward. And because of the nature of today, we've had lots of good discussion, so we've not spoken as much about the organising part that we probably would like to, and we'll probably do that a bit more at the start of next time's session. So I want to try and generate some ideas of how we, as a collective, as a UK Pact, continue to organise and what we would like to do in the future. I know Anna's on the call. Is there anything you would like to say, Anna, before we head off into the rest of the day?
Thanks, Mark. No, just I look forward to the next session, and I agree with you. We really want to have some discussion about the future, but we need to give it some substantial time.
More time. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I have it as a slide, but I think it'd be a shame to squeeze it in today. So I think instead we'll dedicate a portion of time to that, maybe at the start of the next one. So thank you so much for your attention today and your engagement. Great to see you all in 2025, and look out for the next circular. I saw a message about a newsletter. There is a distribution list for UK Pact. If you send me an email, mark.gatto@northumbria.ac.uk, you can find me. If you Google search my name, Northumbria, you can find my email address, and I can try and get you on the distribution list for content around UK Pact. So thank you very much, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, Mike.